Hey guys, you are floating somewhere between seconds, watching stars stretch into thin white threads, as if the universe itself forgot to buffer properly. You drift in a capsule, no larger than a walk-in closet, all brushed metal curves, and a single chair that feels suspiciously like it was borrowed from a dentist's office. Outside the viewport, space isn't dark so much as crowded with moments stacked on top of each other. Pasts and futures shimmering like overlapping reflections on glass. You probably won't survive this. Not in the normal heartbeat to birthday cake sense, anyway. Time travel has a reputation for being extremely rude to people who expect consistency. The machine hums, a low vibration that settles into your bones. It's the sound engineers always use in movies to signal something important is happening. And you briefly wonder if that means you're about to become a cautionary tale told to undergraduates. As the numbers scroll backward, years draining away like bathwater, you feel lighter, as if causality itself is loosening its grip on you. This is the night you break time, or at least poke it hard enough to see if it squeaks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. Somewhere out there, someone else is listening at the exact same cosmic second, and that feels weirdly appropriate right now. The hum deepens. You imagine Earth spinning beneath you, continents rewinding their slow tectonic dances. Cities unbuild themselves. Roads unroll like ribbons being reeled back into a magician's sleeve. There's a real scientific backbone to this fantasy, by the way. According to Einstein's relativity, time and space are woven together into a single fabric called space-time. And under extreme conditions, like near the speed of light or intense gravity, time really does behave differently. That's not sci-fi. Astronauts on the International Space Station age a tiny fraction of a second less than people on Earth. Congratulations, humanity. We've already dipped a toe into temporal nonsense. Your destination isn't some dramatic battlefield or dinosaur-filled jungle. It's a quiet suburban street decades ago. A night that smells faintly of cut grass and gasoline. Somewhere nearby, a man you've only ever seen in old photos your grandfather is alive, unaware that he's about to become the most overworked thought experiment in physics. The famous question coils around your mind. What if you traveled back and killed your grandfather before your parents were conceived? No parent, no you. No you, no trip back. It's like trying to delete the file you're currently editing. Scientists still argue whether this paradox represents a real impossibility or just a limitation of our current understanding. Some say the universe would simply refuse to let you do it. Others shrug and say the math doesn't care about your family tree. As you descend through time, You feel that argument pressing in from all sides, like an academic debate conducted with gravity instead of footnotes. A flicker of static crawls across the viewport. For a second, you swear you see another version of yourself staring back, equally confused, equally underqualified. You blink, and it's gone. That's probably fine. Time travel is known for causing mild hallucinations, existential dread, and the sudden urge to rethink your life choices, kind of like scrolling social media at 2 a.m. There's a fringe idea whispered about in late-night forums and dusty conference rooms. That time isn't just passively waiting for travelers, but actively defended. Not by machines or laws, but by probability itself. The weirder a paradox gets, the less likely the events leading to it become. You trip, you miss the bus, the gun jams. The universe develops impeccable comic timing. It's less Terminator and more slapstick, which honestly feels on brand for reality. The capsule slows. The hum softens into a purr. You feel the weight of the choice ahead, even though you haven't stepped outside yet. This isn't about violence, it's about erasure. About whether your existence is a fragile domino balanced on one ancestral moment, or something sturdier, something the universe is reluctant to lose. You picture yourself fading like a skipped frame, or maybe continuing on as a walking contradiction. Either way, it's rude of time not to send a user manual. Your hand hovers over the release latch. Sweat beads on your palm. You crack a joke to yourself, because of course you do, about how family reunions are about to get really awkward. Humor is the last defense of the primate brain when faced with cosmic absurdity. Outside, a porch light flicks on. A dog barks. History is painfully normal. As you breathe, you realize this moment, this approach, this hesitation is the true beginning of the paradox. Not the act itself, but intent. The universe seems to hold its breath with you, space-time taut as a drawn bow. Whether you step out or not, something fundamental has already shifted. You are here. You weren't supposed to be. And the night feels thin enough to tear. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door unlocks with a gentle click, and time, for the first time, waits on you. Equals. You step out, and the air feels heavier than it should, as if cause and effect have mass, and you're wading through it. Every sound seems delayed by a heartbeat, the bark of that dog, the click of a porch light turning off again, your own breath arriving just after you inhale. You don't move far. You don't need to. This section of the journey isn't about action yet. It's about understanding the invisible chain you're standing inside. Causality, the great cosmic because. Normally, causality is polite. One thing happens, then another, and everyone agrees on the order. You drop a glass, it falls, it shatters. You sigh and promise yourself you'll finally buy non-breakable cups. Physics loves this neat sequence. In everyday life, causes precede effects, and time flows forward like a river you never question because it's always been pushing you in the same direction. That assumption is so baked into your brain that you barely notice it until now, when you're standing upstream. There's a mainstream scientific fact humming quietly beneath your feet. In classical physics, causality is preserved by the speed of light. Information cannot travel faster than light, which neatly prevents effects from showing up before their causes. It's the universe's speed limit, and also its narrative editor, making sure the story stays readable. Einstein didn't just give us cool equations, he gave us a cosmos where before and after are usually well behaved. Usually. But relativity also whispers something unsettling. Time is not absolute. Two observers moving relative to each other can disagree on the order of events. One person's "this happened first" is another person's "actually" that came earlier. You've never noticed because your speeds are laughably slow compared to light, unless you count highway traffic as existentially relativistic. Here, though standing in a past that shouldn't know you exist, that whisper becomes a low murmur of doubt. If order itself depends on perspective, what happens when you change the perspective radically? You imagine causality as a line of dominoes stretching back through generations. Your grandfather is one tile among millions, but knock him out, and the chain behind him never falls. Except you're already here, the final domino wobbling in midair, refusing to commit. Scientists still argue whether such a configuration is even allowed by the laws of physics, or whether the universe has some built-in, nope, function for logical contradictions. There's a fringe tidbit that pops into your head, probably because your brain is desperate for anything that feels like an answer. Some speculative thinkers claim causality is emergent, not fundamental, a byproduct of deeper, timeless laws. In that view, cause and effect are more like habits the universe developed, not rules it must obey. Break the habit, and reality doesn't shatter. It just shrugs and reorganizes. It's the cosmic equivalent of finding out your boss doesn't actually know what's going on either. You take a few steps down the sidewalk, testing whether the world reacts. It does. Gravel crunches. A moth flutters past your face, briefly becoming the most important creature in your universe. Everything responds as expected, which is almost disappointing. Part of you hoped causality would flicker like a faulty light switch, just to confirm you're somewhere truly strange. Instead, it behaves. That's the insidious thing about paradoxes. They look normal right up until they don't. Think about it from the universe's perspective. If the universe has won, which is a debate that has ruined many dinners. It's very good at bookkeeping. Conservation laws track energy and momentum with obsessive precision. Nothing comes from nothing. If you exist here, energy and information describing you exist here. Erasing your grandfather doesn't magically erase that information. Where would it go? Physics hates unanswered questions almost as much as philosophers do. And philosophers are professional grudge holders. You pause near a parked car, its chrome reflecting a distorted version of you. You joke quietly that if you mess this up, at least parallel you might inherit your student loans. Humor again, because otherwise your thoughts spiral. The reflection wobbles as you move, and you realize something unsettling. Causality isn't just about big events like births and deaths. It's about every microinteraction. Every photon bouncing off that chrome had a history. You're adding new histories by being here, and they're already propagating outward at light speed, like gossip that never forgets. There's a concept physicists love called the arrow of time, tied to entropy, the tendency for systems to move from order to disorder. Broken cups don't spontaneously reassemble. Memories point one way. This arrow gives causality its direction. Yet, on the microscopic level, most physical laws don't actually care which way time points. Run the equations backward, and they still work. Scientists still argue whether the arrow of time is fundamental or just a statistical illusion caused by starting conditions long ago. You are, inconveniently, a walking counterexample to neat arrows. A more conspiratorial corner of the internet insists that causality violations already happen, just hidden from us. Deja vu, glitches in the matrix, that feeling you've lived a moment before, supposedly evidence of timelines brushing against each other. You don't fully buy it, but standing here, you're more sympathetic than you were an hour ago, or an hour from now. Time is already getting rude about labels. You notice your heart rate slowing. Familiarity breeds calm, even in impossible situations. That might be the scariest part. If causality can be bent, maybe it can be bent gently, without fireworks. Maybe killing your grandfather wouldn't feel like breaking reality. It would feel like making a choice and watching life adjust around it. The universe has adjusted to worse, after all. Asteroids, supernovae, reality TV. Still, something holds you. A sense that causality is watching, not with eyes, but with probability. The odds stack subtly against actions that would create contradictions. You could chalk that up to fear, or to a universe that prefers coherent stories. Either way, you're learning that causality isn't just a rule, it's a relationship, one you're currently abusing. As you stand there, the night deepens, and the chain of causes stretching from the past into the future feels less like a straight line and more like a woven fabric. Tug one thread, and the tension redistributes everywhere. You haven't pulled yet, but you understand now that the act itself is almost secondary. The real danger lies in assuming the universe owes you a clean outcome. Somewhere nearby, a door opens and closes. Life continues, blissfully unaware of your philosophical crisis. You breathe it in, this ordinary air in an extraordinary context, and you realize the paradox hasn't even fully formed yet. Right now, you're just learning the rules you're about to test, and rules, as you've always suspected, are most interesting right before they bend. Equals equals equals. You see him before you're ready to. Your grandfather stands under a streetlight that hums with the faint buzz of old electricity, the kind that makes moths believe in destiny. He's younger than you've ever known him, stronger posture, quicker movements. No hint yet of the stories you heard growing up. He's just a man, checking his watch, waiting for something mundane like a bus, or a friend who's chronically late. History, it turns out, often looks like boredom. Your chest tightens, not with rage or purpose, but with the sheer absurdity of the setup. This is it. The famous moment philosophers and physicists have been poking with a stick for nearly a century. The grandfather paradox isn't dramatic because of violence. It's dramatic because of logic. If you kill him now, before your parents exist, then you are never born. If you are never born, you never come back. If you never come back, he lives. Round and round it goes. A conceptual hamster wheel powered entirely by headaches. You feel time thicken again, like syrup poured over the night. This isn't just nerves. There's a real, measurable scientific idea lurking here. In physics, events are points in space-time, each with coordinates. Your presence adds a new point that wasn't in the original map. The equations don't scream in protest. They quietly accept the new input. That's unsettling. You always imagined paradoxes as alarms going off, red lights flashing. Instead, it's just silence. The universe waiting to see what you'll do. You take a step closer. Gravel crunches. Your grandfather looks up, mildly curious, not alarmed. You almost wave, then stop yourself, because that feels like the opening scene of a very awkward family holiday special. You joke internally that if this goes wrong, you'll become your own worst ancestor. Dark humor, yes, but it keeps your hands from shaking. Scientists still argue whether the grandfather paradox proves time travel is impossible or merely misunderstood. Some say the contradiction itself is evidence that nature forbids backward time travel entirely. Others counter that paradoxes reveal flaws in our assumptions, not in reality. After all, ancient Greeks thought motion itself was impossible because of paradoxes. And yet here you are, walking, thinking, catastrophizing. A mainstream fact presses in. Quantum mechanics all. Ours events that seem to defy classical causality. Particles can exist in superpositions, influencing outcomes without a clear, linear cause and effect chain. In some experiments, measurements made in the present appear to affect outcomes in the past, at least from certain perspectives. No information actually travels backward, but the math is weird enough to make everyone uncomfortable. If the universe tolerates that level of strangeness, at small scales. Maybe it can handle one confused human at a larger scale. There's a fringe theory you once laughed at: chronological elasticity. The idea that timelines are flexible like rubber bands. Stretch them too far, and they snap into a new configuration. According to this view, killing your grandfather wouldn't erase you. It would simply force history to reroute around the missing piece, inventing some other way for you to exist. An adoption, a different relationship, fate with a shrug and a backup plan. It sounds comforting, which is usually a red flag in cosmology. Your grandfather coughs, shifts his weight, glances down the street. You realize he has no idea how close he is to becoming a footnote in a thought experiment. That's the human part of the paradox that equations tend to skip. This isn't an abstract variable. It's a person who likes coffee a certain way, who once made a bad joke that got retold for decades. The universe might not care, but you do. Or at least, some version of you does. You imagine pulling the trigger, whatever form that takes, and you wait for something to happen, for your vision to blur, for memories to peel away like old wallpaper. Nothing does. That's because you haven't acted yet, but the anticipation reveals something crucial. Paradoxes don't resolve themselves in advance. The universe doesn't preemptively stop you with a lightning bolt. It lets you approach the edge and peer over. Another light joke bubbles up. You think about how family trees should come with warning labels, like tampering may void warranty. You exhale slowly. The night air smells like oil and leaves. Normal smells, grounding smells, which makes the situation feel even more surreal. You're standing at the intersection of logic and instinct, and neither one is giving clear directions. From a philosophical angle, this is the moment where free will gets interrogated under a harsh lamp. If you truly have the freedom to choose, you could create a contradiction. If contradictions are impossible, then maybe you don't really have that freedom, not here, not now. Scientists still argue whether free will is compatible with a deterministic universe, and time travel just adds gasoline to that already flaming debate. Your grandfather takes a step, then another. You realize with a jolt that if you do nothing, history proceeds as you remember it. Doing nothing is also a choice, one that preserves your existence. That feels suspiciously convenient, like the universe nudging you toward the path of least paradox. Probability, again, acting like an invisible hand on your shoulder. There's a conspiratorial whisper in your mind. What if others have stood here before? What if time travelers have already tried and failed, their attempts erased or folded into history so neatly that no one noticed? Maybe that's why the timeline you know feels so stable, because it's been stress tested by countless doomed interventions. You can't prove it, but the idea lingers, like a rumor you can't unhear. You lock eyes with him for a brief second. He nods politely, a stranger acknowledging another stranger. That nod carries the full weight of generations you haven't lived yet. Your hand trembles, then stills. The paradox isn't screaming, it's whispering, daring you to prove it wrong. This is the grandfather moment, the point where theory collides with flesh and blood. Whatever happens next, the clean simplicity of the question is already gone. You understand now that the paradox isn't just about killing an ancestor. It's about whether reality prioritizes logic over lived experience, and whether you're brave or foolish enough to test that priority. You breathe. Time, for once, does not rush you. It simply waits, patient and unreadable, as you decide whether to become a contradiction or remain an unanswered question. The choice collapses into motion, and the universe reacts not with fireworks, but with a shudder so subtle you almost miss it. It's like the feeling in an elevator when it stops 1 inch too low. Reality doesn't scream, it ripples. You sense it before you see it, a pressure change in the air, as if space-time just cleared its throat. Whatever you did, or almost did, has sent consequences radiating outward, invisible but fast, limited only by the speed of light. Cause has met effect, and neither seems entirely satisfied. You expect to feel different, lighter, heavier, non-existent. Instead, you're still here, breathing, heart stubbornly beating. That alone is disorienting. According to T, the most naive version of the paradox, you should be blinking out like a faulty cursor. But physics rarely honors naive expectations. A mainstream fact steadies you. Information, once created, is remarkably hard to destroy. Even black holes, once thought to erase everything, seem to preserve information in subtle ways. If the universe goes to such lengths to keep track of data, maybe it's not going to casually delete you. Around you, the street looks the same, but you start noticing microglitches. A porch light flickers out of sync with its switch. The dog that barked earlier barks again, but the sound echoes twice, like a poorly edited audio track. You joke under your breath that reality needs a software update. It's funny until you realize these are ripples, small inconsistencies where the timeline is renegotiating terms. Scientists still argue whether changes to the past would propagate instantly or gradually. In some models, alterations create shockwaves in space-time, adjusting events forward in time as they encounter the new conditions. You imagine it like weather fronts colliding, warm air meets cold, storms form. History, apparently, has storms too. Somewhere far away, decisions you haven't even heard of are subtly shifting, people feeling off without knowing why. A car drives past, radio playing a song you don't recognize. That's new, you're sure of it. Music is sticky in memory, and this melody doesn't belong to any decade you know. It's not alarming, just unfamiliar. You feel a small spike of panic, then force it down. This is what ripples look like at human scale, not explosions, but details changing their minds. There's a fringe idea that time travel wouldn't rewrite history like erasing chalk from a board, but overwrite it like recording over an old tape. The old signal never fully disappears. It bleeds through as static, déjà vu, Mandela effect arguments on the internet. You used to roll your eyes at those debates. Now, standing in a street that feels 95% right, you're less smug. Maybe those ripples never stop. Maybe they just fade enough that most people ignore them. You glance back toward where your grandfather stood. The streetlight hums on, indifferent. He's gone, walked away, caught a bus, continued a life that may or may not still lead to you. The absence is louder than his presence was. You half expect time to snap back, to correct itself, but it doesn't. It adjusts, like a practiced improviser. The universe, it seems, is very good at damage control. A scientific anchor drops into your thoughts. The equations of general relativity are local. They describe how space-time curves here and now, not how the entire universe updates in one cosmic spreadsheet refresh. That suggests any consequences of your actions would unfold forward, not backward, respecting the light speed limit. Even if you changed something fundamental, the effects would ripple, not teleport. That's comforting, in a way. At least chaos has a speed limit. You feel a strange doubling sensation, as if two versions of your personal history are trying to occupy the same skull. Memories feel intact, but slightly translucent, like images projected onto fog. You remember birthdays that might no longer happen, conversations that may never occur. Your brain hasn't been told to delete them, so it keeps them stubbornly. Scientists still argue whether memory would survive timeline changes or update automatically. Right now, you're living evidence that the question isn't trivial. You laugh quietly, joke number 2 sneaking out, thinking that if this keeps up, you'll need a label on your forehead. Warning: contents may not match local reality. Humor helps, but it doesn't fix the creeping sense that you're out of sync. Like clapping half a beat late and never catching up, a more conspiratorial notion surfaces. What if the ripples attract attention? If time has structure, maybe it has guardians, natural or artificial, that respond to disturbances. Ancient myths talk about fates, modern sci-fi about time police, but even serious physics entertains the idea of self-correcting mechanisms. Cosmic censorship hypotheses suggest nature hides its ugliest inconsistencies behind horizons we can't see past. Paradoxes might be similarly hidden, smoothed over so observers never encounter raw contradiction. You start walking because standing still feels like tempting fate. Each step feels normal, but the ground seems negotiable, like it's accepting your weight provisionally. The further you go, the more subtle differences you notice. A street name spelled slightly differently, A house painted a color you swear it wasn't before. None of it proves anything on its own, but together they form a pattern. Reality is accommodating your presence by rearranging details at the margins. Scientists still argue whether such adjustments would conserve consistency globally or only locally. Could the universe allow small contradictions as long as the big picture holds? You're starting to think yes. Big structures, galaxies, physical laws remain untouched. It's the human scale stuff that flexes. History, like a good storyteller, changes minor details to keep the plot moving. You feel a pang of guilt, then uncertainty about what that guilt is even attached to. Did you harm someone? Did you almost? The paradox muddies moral accounting. If outcomes are blurred, responsibility feels blurred too. That's unsettling in a different way. You preferred the clean terror of this will erase me to this gray fog of something changed, probably. Another joke bubbles up, because apparently that's your coping mechanism, that if you ever write a memoir, no editor will believe it. You exhale, steadying yourself. The ripples seem to be settling, or maybe you're just getting used to the distortion. Either way, the immediate crisis has passed. You exist. The world exists. They just don't line up perfectly anymore. As you look up at the night sky, the stars feel fixed, reassuring. Whatever you've done hasn't reached them yet. It will take years, centuries, millennia, for even light-speed ripples to cross cosmic distances. That thought grounds you. The universe is vast enough to absorb a little narrative turbulence. Still, you know this is only the beginning. Ripples don't ask permission before becoming waves. And as you stand there, slightly out of phase with your own history, you sense that the biggest question isn't what changed out there, but what, quietly and irrevocably, changed in you. You wait for the moment you vanish. It feels almost polite to give reality the chance to do the obvious thing. You half expect your hands to turn translucent, like bad special effects, or for your thoughts to trail off mid-sentence. Instead, you remain annoyingly solid. Your shoes still scuff the pavement. Your lungs still insist on oxygen. Existence, it seems, has decided to keep you on payroll, at least for now. This is where the paradox really gets under your skin. If the simplest story were true, kill grandfather, erase yourself, you shouldn't be here to notice anything at all. And yet, here you are, standing in a slightly off-kilter version of a past that may or may not still lead to you. Do you vanish or persist? The question isn't academic anymore, it's personal. Your continued presence feels like a clerical error in the universe's filing system. There's a mainstream scientific fact that suddenly feels very relevant. In many physical systems, states don't just disappear when conditions change, they evolve. Even unstable particles don't wink out instantly. They decay according to probabilities. half-lives ticking down with quiet patience. If existence itself has inertia, maybe you're not the kind of thing that can be erased in a single logical stroke. Maybe you'd fade gradually, memories dissolving before matter, like a song slowly detuning. Scientists still argue whether such gradual erasure makes any sense at all. Some insist that if the conditions for your birth never occur, your existence is impossible, full stop. Others counter that once you exist, you're part of the universe's state vector, and removing you would require rewriting more than just one event. The universe doesn't like rewriting. It prefers adding footnotes. You check yourself, half expecting some kind of glitch. Your reflection in a dark window still matches your movements, though it lags by a fraction of a second. That might just be bad glass, but paranoia has entered the chat. You joke quietly that if you're going to dissolve, you'd at least like a countdown timer. No such luck. A fringe idea creeps in, temporal inertia. The notion that time travelers carry their own timeline with them, a kind of personal causality bubble that protects them from immediate changes. According to this view, you're not anchored to local history anymore. You're anchored to yourself. That's comforting in a narcissistic way and terrifying in every other. If true, you could become a permanent anomaly, immune to erasure, but forever out of place. You start to feel tired, not physically, but existentially, like you've been holding a heavy thought overhead for too long. Memories surface uninvited, your childhood home, a laugh you recognize as your mother's, a story your grandfather once told about getting lost as a boy. Are these memories still true? Did they happen? Or are they artifacts from a timeline that's already slipping away? Scientists still argue whether memory is tied to objective history or simply to neural patterns. Right now, your brain doesn't care. It keeps playing the highlights reel. You notice something unsettling. The emotional charge of those memories is duller. Not gone, just muted. As if they're being gently deprioritized. You laugh softly, joke number 2, thinking that even nostalgia isn't safe from paradoxes. If this is what vanishing feels like, it's less dramatic than advertised. More like being slowly forgot. 10 by the universe. A car passes, and the driver glances at you, frowns, then looks away. For a split second, you wonder if you were invisible. But no, he definitely saw you. The hesitation lingers, though. You get the sense that you don't quite register the way other people do. Like a background character whose name never makes it into the script. It's subtle, but it stings. There's a serious debate in physics about whether contradictions can exist at all. Some logicians argue that reality might tolerate local inconsistencies without collapsing. Others insist that a single true contradiction would allow anything to happen, turning the universe into nonsense. Scientists still argue where on that spectrum our cosmos sits. You're starting to suspect it's closer to messy but functional, then perfectly logical. Another fringe notion surfaces. Maybe you're already gone, in a sense. Maybe the you who should have existed in this altered timeline never did, and you're a leftover, an echo from a discarded version of history. That would explain the offness, the way the world seems to accommodate you without fully acknowledging you. You shiver, not from cold, but from the idea of being cosmic leftovers. You try to ground yourself with facts. Matter is conserved. Energy doesn't vanish. Even information seems stubbornly persistent. If the universe goes to such lengths to preserve structure, why would it casually delete a conscious observer? Maybe erasure isn't the universe's style. Maybe persistence is. You make a third, softer joke, because the rule of 3 demands it, that if you're immortal now, you'd like to at least skip Mondays. The humor fades quickly, leaving a hollow echo. You realize that persisting isn't automatically better than vanishing. Existing without belonging is its own kind of paradox. As you walk, you feel the ripples from earlier settling further, like waves flattening after a stone drop. The world grows steadier, but you don't. The question remains unanswered, hovering just behind your thoughts. Will this persistence last? Or is it just a grace period before the universe finishes its accounting? You look up again, searching the sky for reassurance, but the stars offer none. They shine the same way they always have, indifferent to lineage and logic. In that indifference, you find a strange comfort. Whether you vanish tomorrow or persist forever as a walking contradiction, the universe won't dramatize it. For now, you exist. That fact, simple and stubborn, outweighs every theory arguing you shouldn't. And as you continue moving through a timeline that no longer fits you perfectly, you begin to understand that the paradox isn't a single moment of erasure. It's a long, quiet question about what it really means to be here at all. The longer you exist without disappearing, the more the universe starts to feel less hostile and more managerial. Like it's quietly rearranging paperwork behind the scenes to make sure nothing catastrophic shows up in the audit. This is where an idea you once skimmed past in a book suddenly steps into the spotlight. The self-consistency principle, the notion that if time travel is possible, then events must unfold in a way that avoids paradoxes, not by erasing travelers, but by making sure history remains internally consistent. In plain terms, it suggests that you were never going to succeed in creating a contradiction. If you go back in time, whatever you do there is always part of history. The universe doesn't branch, doesn't glitch, doesn't panic. It simply ensures that your actions fit neatly into what already happened. You didn't notice because you weren't supposed to. Time, according to this view, isn't a fragile story you can rewrite. It's a closed book you're rereading from a strange angle. There's a solid mainstream backbone to this idea. Physicist Igor Novikov formalized the self-consistency principle as a way to reconcile time travel with the known laws of physics. In solutions to Einstein's equations that allow closed time-like curves, paths through spacetime that loop back on themselves, only self-consistent histories are permitted. Any event that would create a paradox simply has zero probability of occurring. Not low probability. Zero. Like trying to roll a 6-sided die and getting a pineapple. You replay the moment with your grandfather in your mind. The hesitation, the distractions, the way circumstances subtly nudged you away from doing anything irreversible. At the time, it felt like indecision. Now, it feels suspiciously like choreography. You weren't stopped by a force field or a booming cosmic voice. You were stopped by normal things: timing, emotion, chance. The universe's favorite tools. Scientists still argue whether this principle reflects a deep truth about reality or just a mathematical patch to keep equations from misbehaving. Critics point out that zero probability events still feel philosophically unsatisfying. If something can't P-pen, why does it feel like you could have done it? Why did it feel like a choice at all? That tension between lived experience and theoretical inevitability presses on you now. A fringe tidbit floats up from the murkier edges of speculation. Some people believe self-consistency isn't enforced by physics alone, but by something like narrative pressure. The universe, in this view, behaves less like a machine and more like a story that refuses plot holes. Characters can struggle, improvise, even suffer, but the ending was always baked in. It's a comforting idea if you like stories, and a deeply unsettling one if you like free will. You start noticing how neatly things line up when you think this way. The ripples you sensed earlier didn't spiral into chaos. They dampened. The unfamiliar song on the radio didn't rewrite culture. It just filled a gap you never paid attention to before. History flexed just enough to include you without contradicting itself. Like a puzzle piece that always fits, even if you only noticed it late. You chuckle softly first joke of the section, thinking that if the universe is self-consistent, it's also incredibly passive-aggressive. Instead of saying, no, it lets you try and fail in the most anticlimactic ways possible. Guns jam. People miss appointments. Conscience kicks in at inconvenient moments. Free will, but with guardrails. There's an important scientific nuance here. Probability in physics isn't about what feels likely to you. It's about what's allowed by the equations. In quantum mechanics, events with zero probability simply never occur, no matter how much you want them to. If paradoxical actions fall into that category, then your subjective sense of choice doesn't map cleanly onto objective reality. You felt free, but the outcome was already constrained. You test this idea mentally by imagining other actions. What if you tripped and caused a chain reaction? What if you'd warned someone about the future? Each scenario seems to fold back into itself, closing loops, preventing contradictions. It's like trying to write a sentence that deletes itself mid-word. The grammar of the universe won't allow it. Scientists still argue whether this makes time travel trivial or meaningless. If everything you do was always part of history, then traveling to the past doesn't let you change anything. It just reveals hidden causes. You weren't altering the timeline, you were fulfilling it. That's a hard pill to swallow for a species raised on stories about changing destiny. A conspiratorial corner of your brain wonders if this principle is why time travelers, if they exist, are so boringly invisible. Maybe they've always been here, nudging events just enough to keep things on track, never making headlines because headlines would imply deviation. The universe doesn't need enforcers if consistency is built in. It just needs patience. You feel a strange easing in your chest. The anxiety of what have I done softens into what was I always going to do. It's not exactly comforting, but it's stabilizing. Like realizing you're on rails after panicking about steering. You still move. You still feel the wind. You just don't derail. The second joke slips out quietly. You think about how self-consistency would make therapy sessions incredibly awkward. So tell me about your childhood. Well, it was inevitable. Even you groan at that one, but humor helps integrate the idea without spiraling. There's a philosophical trade-off here. Self-consistency saves logic, but it taxes the agency. If you couldn't have acted otherwise, what does responsibility mean? Scientists still argue whether determinism of this sort is compatible with meaningful choice, or whether it reduces freedom to an illusion that just happens to feel very convincing. You don't have an answer, but you feel the weight of the question. As you walk, the world continues to behave. People pass. Cars obey traffic laws. History hums along, apparently unbothered by your existential crisis. That, more than anything, convinces you that self-consistency might be real. The universe doesn't act like something narrowly avoided disaster. It acts like something that never considered disaster an option. You pause, realizing that if this principle holds, then the grandfather paradox dissolves. You can't kill your grandfather because you didn't. Any attempt you made was always destined to fail, in ways that preserved the timeline you came from. Not because of morality or luck, but because inconsistency simply isn't on the menu. Third, gentler jokes surface as you exhale. You imagine the universe as a bouncer checking IDs at the door of reality. Sorry, paradox, not tonight. It's silly, but it sticks. settles in slowly, like sediment in water. Maybe you were never here to change anything. Maybe you were here to learn that time doesn't need your help staying coherent. The self-consistency principle doesn't erase the mystery. It rams it. The question stops being, what if I change the past? And becomes, why did the past always include me? As that realization sinks in, the night feels steadier, less prone to tearing. You're still an anomaly, still out of place, but no longer a threat. Just another loop closed, another cause revealed after the effect. And somewhere deep in spacetime's quiet logic, the universe checks a box, satisfied that the story still makes sense. The sense of rails beneath your feet fades, replaced by something looser, quieter, and infinitely wider. You feel it before you fully think it. The idea that the universe didn't just accommodate you, it duplicated itself. Not dramatically, not with a thunderclap, but with the soft inevitability of a thought finishing itself. Branching universes. The many worlds interpretation slipping into place like it's been waiting patiently for you to notice. In this view, the grandfather paradox never really had teeth. You didn't threaten your own existence, you sidestepped it. The moment you interfered, reality forked. One branch continues toward the future you remember, where your grandfather lives, your parents are born, and eventually you exist to make this very trip. Another branch diverges quietly, one where your actions led to a different outcome, maybe subtle, maybe profound. You didn't erase yourself. You just left home. There's a solid, mainstream foundation here. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics proposes that all possible outcomes of quantum events actually occur, each in its own branch of the universe. No wave function collapse, no single privileged history, just an ever-branching tree of realities. It's mathematically consistent, and depending on who you ask, either beautifully elegant or deeply unsettling. If it's true at the smallest scales, some physicists argue it could extend upward, accommodating time travel without paradox, by turning contradictions into separations. Scientists still argue whether many worlds is a literal description of reality, or just a convenient way to calculate outcomes without committing to hidden mechanisms. Critics say it multiplies universes unnecessarily. Supporters counter that it removes the need for mysterious collapses. Standing here, feeling slightly unmoored from the timeline you remember, the idea feels less abstract. If universes can branch for electrons, why not for people with time machines and bad ideas? You look around again. The street hasn't dramatically changed, but it doesn't need to. Branches don't announce themselves. They diverge at the molecular level, in decisions and interactions too small to notice immediately. This version of the past could still look nearly identical, even if it's destined to drift far from the one you left. You think of it like copying a document and changing a single word. For a while, both files look the same. A fringe tidbit slides in, equal parts eerie and comforting. Some speculative thinkers suggest we constantly branch without noticing, creating countless versions of ourselves who made slightly different choices. You just did it louder. According to this idea, death itself might be a kind of branch where consciousness simply continues along the paths where it survives. It's not exactly bedtime friendly, but it's weirdly soothing if you squint. You laugh softly first joke, thinking that if there are infinite versions of you, at least one of them probably made better life choices. Maybe one remembered to stretch more. Humor, again, as a flotation device in deep conceptual water. The branching idea explains something the self-consistency principle didn't fully satisfy. Your memories. They don't need to fade or update because they belong to a different branch. You carry the history of your origin universe with you like an accent that never quite disappears. Locals here won't hear it, but you always will. Scientists still argue whether such memory transfer is even meaningful across branches, but subjectively, it feels real enough to matter. You wonder what happened to the version of you that belongs here, if one exists at all. Maybe in this branch, you were never born. Maybe someone else fills your role. Or maybe this branch converges back towards something eerily similar, differences ironing themselves out over time. Many worlds doesn't guarantee dramatic divergence. It just allows it. The universe is free to be boring if it wants. There's a quiet moral relief in this interpretation. You didn't annihilate yourself or doom the cosmos. You just created or entered a different lane. Responsibility shifts from I broke everything to I chose differently. And now I live with that. It's still heavy, but it's survivable. You can carry that weight without collapsing. A second, gentler joke drifts through your mind. You imagine the multiverse as the world's messiest filing system, with identical folders labeled Final V3, Really Final THIS 1. Somewhere, a cosmic intern is CR. Ying, the image sticks, and you smile despite yourself. Scientifically, there's a catch. Many worlds is deterministic at the universal level. Every possible outcome happens, which means branching doesn't restore free will in the traditional sense, it reframes it. You don't choose which outcome exists. You experience one of many that inevitably do. Scientists still argue whether that counts as freedom or just fancy fatalism. Either way, it's freedom with an asterisk. You feel a subtle emotional shift. The fear of erasure has been replaced by the loneliness of separation. If you've branched away from your origin universe, then everything you loved there continues without you. Your absence might be unremarkable, another missed call, another person who moved away, but it's permanent. That realization settles in your chest, heavy and quiet. You sit on a low wall, letting the night wrap around you. The sky here looks the same, stars arranged in familiar patterns. Of course they do. Even branches share most of their trunk. Cosmic scales are forgiving like that. It's the small, human details that diverge first. A fringe whisper suggests that some branches are thicker than others, more stable, more heavily populated with consciousness. Maybe you've slipped into a thinner one, where probability feels a little stretched. You don't know if that's nonsense, but it matches the faint sense of fragility you feel, like walking on ice that hasn't cracked yet, but could. Third joke, barely there. You think about how explaining this to anyone would sound like an excuse. Sorry, I forgot your birthday. I may be from a different universe. You almost laugh out loud, then stop, because no one here would get it. And that's the point. Branching universes offer a bloodless solution to the grandfather paradox. No contradictions, no erasures, just divergence. But they also take something from you, the comfort of a single, shared history. You're not standing in the past anymore. You're standing in the past, one of many. And the plural hangs in the air, impossible to ignore. As you rise and start walking again, the path ahead doesn't feel predetermined or forbidden. It feels open in a different way, open sideways, into countless unseen possibilities. You can't go back to where you came from, not really. That branch is still there, humming along without you. But this one is yours now, for better or worse. The paradox hasn't been solved so much as bypassed. And as the night deepens, you begin to understand that living in a branch is less about what you escaped and more about what you're willing to accept. That reality didn't break when you challenged it. It simply made room. You start to notice the lag. Not the dramatic kind where buildings blur or people stutter mid-sentence, but a quieter mismatch, like audio, that's just a fraction behind the video. Your thoughts arrive early. The world responds late. Memory versus reality, slightly out of phase. If branching universes explain why you still exist, this explains why existing feels itchy. Your memories belong to a different timeline, and they don't have anywhere official to live here. They sit in your head like foreign currency, recognizable, valuable to you, and increasingly useless to everyone else. You remember facts that no longer check out, songs no one seems to know, tiny cultural references that earn polite blank stares. It's not dramatic enough to scream alternate universe, but it's enough to make you hesitate before speaking. There's a solid scientific anchor beneath this unease. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Each time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it from fragments. That process is influenced by your current environment. If the environment no longer matches the original context, memories degrade faster. Psychologists know this well. Context matters. Your context just quietly betrayed you. Scientists still argue whether memory would automatically update to match a changed timeline or remain anchored to the traveler's origin. Some models assume memory is purely physical and should rewrite itself along with the brain's history. Others suggest consciousness might preserve subjective continuity even when objective history shifts. You are, unhelpfully, a data point of one. You test it with something simple. You recall a movie line you know by heart and whisper it aloud. It sounds right to you. Later, when you overhear someone quoting the same scene, the wording is different close, but not exact. The kind of difference people argue about online for years. You feel a small chill. This isn't just a bad recall. This is a mismatch. A fringe tidbit bubbles up from the darker corners of speculation. The idea of timeline refugees. People who slip between histories and carry incompatible memories, slowly losing credibility as the world insists they're wrong. Some conspiracy circles claim this explains mass false memories, the so-called Mandela effect. You used to roll your eyes at that. Now you're doing less eye-rolling and more quiet note-taking. You laugh under your breath, first joke of the section, thinking that if nothing else, you're finally qualified to be smug in internet arguments. Actually, in my universe, you stop yourself. That way lies madness and comment sections. The mismatch isn't constant. Some days, everything lines up well enough that you forget you're out of place. Other days, it's relentless. Street layouts feel subtly wrong. Names don't match faces the way you expect. You find yourself pausing before turns, instincts misfiring. It's like muscle memory for a house that's been renovated while you were away. There's a mainstream physics concept that suddenly feels personal. Reference frames. In relativity, different observers can measure different times and distances for the same events, and all of them are correct within their own frame. There is no universal now. Your memories belong to a different frame, one that no longer aligns cleanly with this branch's present. Both are valid. They're just not compatible. Scientists still argue whether such incompatibility would cause cognitive breakdown or gradual adaptation. The brain is remarkably plastic. It rewires itself all the time. You can already feel it trying, prioritizing recent inputs, dulling older ones. That scares you more than the glitches did. You don't want to lose your origin history, even if no one else cares about it. A second, softer joke slips out. You think about how this is the ultimate excuse for misremembering names. Sorry, in my timeline you were Steve. You almost smile. Then the loneliness creeps back in. Jokes land differently when no one shares the premise. There's a deeper philosophical sting here. If your memories don't match reality, which one defines truth? The past you remember feels real because you lived it. The past, this universe, insists on feels real because it produced everything around you. Scientists still argue whether truth is observer-dependent or anchored to a single objective history. You're starting to suspect it's both, and that the overlap isn't guaranteed. You notice that emotional memories are the most stubborn. Feelings don't need perfect factual alignment to persist. Love, fear, embarrassment, they survive translation. You still feel affection for people who don't quite exist the way you remember. That's the cruelest mismatch of all. Emotion doesn't care about timelines. A fringe theory suggests that mismatched memories generate psychic noise, subtle stress that accumulates over time. Not enough to break you, but enough to exhaust you. You feel that now, a low-grade fatigue that sleep doesn't quite fix. It's the cost of being out of sync. Third joke, barely audible even to yourself. You think about how therapists would have a field day with this. And when did these feelings of temporal displacement begin? You exhale slowly, letting the humor dissolve into breath. As days pass, or something like days, you adapt. You stop correcting people. You stop testing memories against reality. You learn which recollections are safe to keep private and which ones to let blur. That adaptation is both a relief and a loss. Each adjustment pulls you further into this branch, away from the one that made you. You realize that the paradox didn't just challenge physics, it challenged identity. Who are you if your past isn't shared by the world around you? Identity, like memory, turns out to be relational. It depends on agreement. Without that agreement, it becomes quieter, more internal. The mismatch never fully disappears. It becomes a background hum, like tinnitus of the soul. You can live with it. People live with worse. But it reminds you constantly that you crossed a boundary most people never see. As night falls again, you sit somewhere familiar enough to feel safe and unfamiliar enough to stay honest. You let the memories come without fact-checking them. They're yours, even if they don't belong here. And in that private space, you accept a hard truth. Surviving the grandfather paradox doesn't mean emerging unchanged. It means carrying a past the universe no longer recognizes and learning how to live anyway. The mismatch settles into something quieter, and with that quiet comes a new way of seeing time itself. Not as a rushing river you fell into by accident, but as a solid landscape you're standing inside. Past, present, and future laid out all at once, like a map you can't fully read because you're stuck at one coordinate. Time as a block, not a flow. The idea feels strange at first, but also oddly respectful of everything you've experienced so far. In the block universe view, sometimes called eternalism, all moments in time are equally real. Yesterday doesn't vanish. Tomorrow doesn't wait patiently to exist. They're all there, coexisting, just not equally accessible. Your sense of now is simply where your consciousness happens to be slicing through the block. That's not mystical. It drops straight out of relativity. Einstein himself suggested that the distinction between past, present, and future is a stubborn illusion, even if a persistent one. This is a mainstream scientific fact that suddenly clicks into place. In relativity, there is no universal present. Different observers, moving at different speeds or sitting in different gravitational fields, will disagree on which events are happening now. If there's no single present, then the idea of time flowing uniformly for everyone starts to wobble. A block universe doesn't flow. It just is. You feel a strange relief at this. If time is a block, then your grandfather's paradox didn't involve reaching back and rewriting something fragile. You just moved to a different location within the same four-dimensional structure. Your presence in the past doesn't threaten the future any more than standing on a hill threatens the valley below. Everything already has its place. Scientists still argue whether the block universe is a literal description of reality or just a useful way to interpret equations. Some physicists prefer a growing block model where the past and present exist, but the future does yet. Others insist only the present is real and everything else is a memory or a plan. You're standing in a lived argument, which is not the most comfortable place to be, but it is informative. The block view reframes your earlier experiences. The self-consistency you felt, that's just geometry. The branching universes, those could be different blocks, stacked like an infinite library. Your memory mismatch, that's what happens when your consciousness carries coordinates from one block into another. Nothing mystical, just misalignment. A fringe tidbit drifts in, the kind you'd usually dismiss, but now entertain. Some esoteric thinkers claim that highly advanced civilizations perceive time spatially. They don't remember the past or anticipate the future. They navigate them. To such beings, time travel wouldn't be a paradox at all, just a change in direction. You imagine an alien shaking its head gently at humanity's confusion, like watching someone argue with a map. You chuckle first joke, thinking that if time is a block, then procrastination is just choosing a different scenic route through it. Unfortunately, the deadlines still exist, immovable and judgmental. There's something sobering about realizing that, in this view, nothing is ever truly erased. Every version of you, every choice you made or didn't make, still exists somewhere in the block or in some neighboring one. The child you were, the person you might have been if you'd stayed in your origin timeline, they're not gone. You're just not standing there anymore. Scientists still argue whether this implies determinism. If all moments exist, does that mean the future is fixed? Or does your experience of moving through the block still allow for meaningful choice? Some argue that freedom lies in which path your consciousness traces, even if the terrain itself is static. Others say that's just determinism wearing a friendlier outfit. You don't settle the debate, but you feel its weight. You notice how this perspective softens the fear you once had of breaking time. You can't break a block by walking through it. You can only misunderstand your place within it. That misunderstanding, it turns out, is most of human anxiety. You're not late. You're not early. You're just here. A second joke slips in as you imagine the universe as a museum exhibit. Please do not touch the past, the sign says, while absolutely no one enforces it. You grin briefly, then let the thought fade. There's a personal consequence to this view that takes a moment to land. If all your moments exist, then the pain you felt earlier, the fear, the loneliness, the disorientation also exists permanently. It doesn't get erased by growth or understanding, but neither does the relief you feel now or the calm that's starting to replace the noise. Comfort and discomfort coexist, layered in the block, neither canceling the other. A more conspiratorial idea surfaces. What if déjà vu is a brief awareness of the block? A flicker where your consciousness brushes against a neighboring slice, recognizing a pattern it's technically already lived. You don't commit to believing that, but you stop dismissing it outright. Too many things you once dismissed have shown up tonight wearing name tags. Scientists still argue whether consciousness itself is what gives time its arrow, whether the feeling of flow comes from how brains process information. In that view, time doesn't move, you do. Memory piles up behind you, expectation stretches ahead, and the block stays put. That makes your earlier sense of lag make more sense. You were adjusting to a new orientation, not a new timeline. Third, very quiet joke. You think about how this makes living in the moment sound aggressively literal. Congratulations, you're always doing it, whether you want to or not. As you sit with this, the universe feels less reactive, less like something you're poking, and more like something you're inhabiting. The fear of paradox fades into something more manageable, humility. You're not the author of time's story. You're a character discovering which page you're on. The block universe doesn't solve everything. It doesn't tell you which choices matter or how to live with mismatched memories. But it gives you a frame sturdy enough to hold all the other ideas without cracking. Self-consistency, branching worlds, memory drift, they're not competing explanations anymore. They're different ways of walking through the same structure. You stand, stretch, and look around at the ordinary world glowing softly under streetlights. It's still the same place, still filled with people moving through their own slices of time, unaware of the geometry they're embedded in. That ignorance doesn't make their lives less real. If anything, it makes them gentler. You take a breath, feeling grounded in a way you haven't since this journey began. You're not falling through time. You're standing in it. And for the first time since you stepped into that humming capsule, the universe doesn't feel like something that might erase you. It feels like something vast enough to include you, exactly where you are. Standing inside time instead of sliding along, it makes certain doors visible that you didn't know were there. One of them curves back on itself, not as a branch, not as a blocky detour, but as a loop. You feel it like a subtle tug, a suggestion in the geometry of events. Closed, time-like curves, paths through space-time that circle around and return to their own past. Beginnings that feed endings that feed beginnings again. Time, briefly forgetting it, prefers straight lines. This isn't fringe sci-fi. It drops straight out of Einstein's equations. Under extreme conditions, rotating black holes, infinitely long spinning cylinders, exotic distributions of mass, general relativity, permit solutions where space-time loops. In these regions, traveling forward in time long enough brings you back to where you started. Not metaphorically. Literally. Your watch ticks. The universe shrugs. And suddenly, before and after shake hands. Scientists still argue whether such closed time-like curves can exist in reality, or whether some deeper law forbids them before they ever form. The math allows them. Nature, so far, has been coy. You can almost hear it saying, just because you can write it down doesn't mean I'll build it. You picture your own journey through that lens, not as a branching escape or a one-time intrusion, but as a loop you were always part of. You go back. You hesitate. You fail to create a paradox. You return changed. That change is what eventually leads you to go back in the first place. Cause chasing effect around a circle, never quite catching it, never quite letting it go. There's a mainstream physics anchor here that feels oddly comforting. In space-times with closed time-like curves, self-consistent loops are the only stable solutions. You can't change events within the loop. You can only fulfill them. That aligns disturbingly well with everything you've experienced. The nudges, the improbabilities, the sense that your actions were constrained without being visibly blocked. A fringe tidbit whispers from the edges of speculative lore. Some ancient myths describe time as a serpent eating its own tail. Ouroboros, eternal return. Long before equations, people sensed something looped and recursive about existence. Maybe they weren't being poetic. Maybe they were being observational with limited tools. You laugh softly, first joke, thinking that if time is a loop, then history isn't doomed to repeat itself. It's just committed to the bit. The idea of loops reframes responsibility again. If you're part of a closed time-like curve, then your actions don't initiate events, they maintain them. You didn't choose to go back because of what happened. What happened happened because you went back. Scientists still argue whether this destroys free will or merely redefines it. Maybe freedom isn't about changing outcomes, but about participating in them consciously. You notice how this dissolves some of the loneliness you felt earlier. In a looped view, you're not a refugee from another timeline or a misaligned observer. You're a necessary component of a self-consistent structure. Your confusion, your hesitation, even your jokes, they're load-bearing. Remove them, and the loop collapses. The second joke slides in as you imagine a warning label on space-time. Caution may contain recursive humans. You shake your head, smiling despite the chill the idea brings. There's a darker implication too. Loops can trap. If your path through time circles endlessly, then growth doesn't mean escape, it means depth. You don't move on, you move around. Scientists still argue whether such loops could allow subjective change, memory accumulation, learning, or whether consciousness would reset each cycle. Your memories suggest accumulation is possible, which is both hopeful and exhausting. You think back to the subtle glitches, the memory mismatches, the feeling of being nudged. In a looped universe, those aren't errors. They're seams, places where your awareness brushes against its own past and future. The discomfort you felt wasn't damage, it was friction. A conspiratorial idea surfaces. Maybe some people sense loops more strongly than others. The ones obsessed with patterns, déjà vu, repeating mistakes. Not because they're broken, but because they're closer to the curve. You don't fully buy it, but you stop dismissing it. Dismissal has been a poor strategy tonight. Third, quiet joke. You think about how this makes learning from history sound redundant. History already learned from you. As the thought settles, time feels less like an enemy and more like a dance partner with questionable rhythm. You step, it responds. You repeat. There's comfort in knowing the floor won't vanish beneath you, even if you don't control the music. Closed time-like curves don't solve the grandfather paradox by denying it or branching away from it. They absorb it. They say, yes, you went back. Yes, you tried. And yes, it always worked out this way. The paradox dissolves into a loop, and the loop becomes structured. You breathe, letting that structure hold you. The fear of erasure, the anxiety of mismatch, the loneliness of branching, they all soften when seen as parts of a closed shape. You're not stuck. You're placed. As you look ahead or behind, the distinction is getting fuzzy. You sense that this loop isn't infinite. It has boundaries, enforced not by logic, but by something quieter. The universe, for all its tolerance of strange geometry, still has rules about what it will reveal. And as that realization settles, you feel the presence of another idea waiting nearby, one that doesn't prevent paradoxes by geometry or branching, but by hiding them entirely. Nature, it seems, has more than one way to keep its secrets. That quiet boundary you sensed sharpens into something firmer, like a curtain drawn just far enough to hide the machinery behind it. You feel it not as a wall, but as a limit on what you're allowed to know. Cosmic censorship. The idea that nature politely refuses to show you its worst contradictions, tucking them behind horizons where observation can't reach. If closed time-like curves exist, if paradoxes try to form, maybe they're simply hidden, shielded from causing the kind of logical meltdown your intuition keeps expecting. In mainstream physics, cosmic censorship is a hypothesis about singularities. Roger Penrose proposed that the universe hides naked singularities, points where equations break down inside black holes, behind event horizons. You never see the math go wild, you just see darkness. The laws stay respectable from the outside. If nature does this for gravity, why not for time? If paradoxes threaten coherence, maybe they're quarantined the same way. Scientists still argue whether cosmic censorship is a true law or just an optimistic guess. We haven't proven it, and we haven't found a clear counterexample either. It's one of those ideas that exists because the alternative feels unbearable. A universe where contradictions are visible everywhere, shredding predictability. Standing where you are, you begin to appreciate how much effort reality seems to put into staying comprehensible. You replay your journey through that lens. Every time the paradox sharpened, something intervened, not violently, not obviously, but effectively. Your hesitation, the improbabilities, the way consequences rippled gently instead of exploding. Maybe you brushed up against a boundary you weren't meant to cross, and the universe responded by dimming the lights. Not stopping you, just refusing to illuminate the worst-case scenario. A fringe tidbit bubbles up from the conspiracy end of the pool. Some claim black holes aren't just cosmic trash compactors, but information vaults, places where contradictions and impossible states are stored, inaccessible, but not destroyed. Time travel paradoxes, in that view, don't vanish. They're locked away, sealed off from observers like you. You don't see the contradiction because you're not allowed to. You smile faintly, first joke, imagining the universe running a very strict moderation policy. This content violates our community guidelines. Post removed. Paradox hidden. There's something oddly comforting about that. It suggests that the universe isn't fragile. It can tolerate absurdity internally as long as it preserves a stable surface. The rules you experience are less about ultimate truth and more about usability. Scientists still argue whether physical laws are fundamental or emergent, whether they're the bedrock of reality or just the interface layer your kind of mind can handle. Tonight, the interface theory feels persuasive. You notice how this reframes your fear. You weren't on the brink of breaking time. You were on the brink of seeing something unseeable. The universe's response wasn't punishment, it was discretion. Like a parent turning the TV away from the news when things get too real. The second joke drifts in softer. You think about how this makes reality feel very corporate. Lots of internal chaos, but a clean press release. There's a deeper implication here. If cosmic censorship hides paradoxes, then your philosophical debates about free will, branching, loops, they might all be partially right, operating in different hidden layers. The universe doesn't owe you a single, clean explanation. It owes you continuity. And so far, it's delivered. Scientists still argue whether censorship applies only to gravity or to all fundamental inconsistencies. Some suspect there's a deeper principle, consistency protection, that prevents observers from witnessing logical breakdowns. You might skirt the edges, feel the distortion, but you won't fall through. That matches your experience uncomfortably well. You think about how normal life feels again. The streetlights, the hum of distant traffic. If you'd truly broken something, surely it would show. Instead, the world carries on, serene in its ignorance. That serenity isn't proof nothing happened. It's proof that whatever happened was contained. A conspiratorial whisper suggests that maybe some people do see past the curtain, and that's why their stories sound incoherent. Prophets, mystics, the chronically obsessed with time. Not because they're wrong, but because they've glimpsed censored content and can't translate it cleanly. You don't fully accept that, but you stop dismissing it outright. Too many boundaries tonight have felt intentional. The third joke surfaces, almost affectionately. You imagine space-time whispering, "Trust me, you don't want to see this part." You nod, because honestly, you're exhausted enough already. Cosmic censorship doesn't answer whether you could have killed your grandfather. It suggests that even if you did, the contradiction would be hidden behind an observational horizon. From your point of view, the universe would reconfigure smoothly. No alarms, no erasure, just continuity. The paradox exists somewhere you can't point to, like a file you don't have permission to open. That realization shifts something in you. The need to resolve the paradox intellectually loosens its grip. Maybe the universe isn't a riddle to be solved, but a system to be lived in. One that prioritizes experience over explanation. As you breathe, you feel that boundaries settle around you, not as a cage, but as a gentle limit. You can explore time, bend perspectives, even loop around yourself. But but some things will remain offstage, hidden to preserve the show. And maybe that's okay. The night feels quieter now, not because questions are answered, but because you trust that unanswered doesn't mean broken. The universe has rules for handling its own contradictions, and you don't need to supervise them. You take one last look at the ordinary world glowing calmly under the stars. Whatever paradox you threatened tonight, it's been absorbed, hidden, or redirected. Reality remains intact. And in that intactness, you feel a strange gratitude, because sometimes the most merciful thing a universe can do is not explain itself, just keep going and let you go with it. Walking further into the quiet night, you start noticing patterns in the small things. Streetlights hum in rhythmic cycles. Distant traffic pulses like a heartbeat. Even the wind seems to carry subtle repetition. It's as if time itself is layering textures, faintly audible if you listen closely. You begin to sense that all the mechanisms you've glimpsed, the loops, the branches, the hidden paradoxes, aren't just abstract theories. They're the scaffolding that holds reality together, subtle enough to let life feel ordinary, yet real enough that your consciousness can detect the vibrations. Mainstream scientific fact grounds you in this sensation. Space-time isn't perfectly smooth. General relativity tells us that mass and energy curve it, and even the empty vacuum of space has fluctuations at the quantum level. These aren't just theoretical, they create tiny distortions that can influence light and matter. Walking through a city, you feel like you're walking through a miniature landscape of these curvatures, where every step touches a gentle dip or rise in the hidden geometry of existence. Scientists still argue about the degree to which quantum fluctuations scale up to macroscopic effects. Could these tiny ripples actually influence time travel outcomes, or are they confined to subatomic chaos? Your experience tonight suggests the former, at least subjectively. The world seems malleable in ways both imperceptible and intimate, as if it remembers your presence while staying perfectly indifferent to it. A fringe tidbit floats to the surface. Some theorists speculate that consciousness itself is sensitive to these microscopic folds, capable of nudging probabilities ever so slightly. It's why déjà vu exists, why certain coincidences feel almost orchestrated. You smile quietly, first joke, thinking that your brain might be the universe's most amateurish DJ, remixing events just enough to make things interesting. You pause to touch a fence post. The metal is cold, smooth, completely ordinary. Yet, in the context of your journey, it feels like a tether. Something solid in a world that has shifted beneath you in invisible ways. You wonder if you're anchoring yourself to this reality with tiny gestures, like breadcrumbs for your consciousness. Scientists still argue whether grounding techniques like this could actually stabilize perception during temporal dissonance, or if it's purely psychological. Either way, it works. The interplay of loops, branches, and censorship starts to feel like choreography. You notice subtle nudges in people's behavior, minor coincidences that push you along a path that avoids contradictions. A car slows inexplicably at the right moment. A street musician starts playing a tune that lifts your mood. The universe, if it has intentions, is remarkably subtle about enforcement. The third joke slips out quietly. If reality has a sense of humor, it's dry, sarcastic, and spectacularly patient. Your mind drifts to the memory mismatches, the sense that your own past doesn't fully align with this branch. It's less frightening now, more like a companion. A reminder that even as the universe maintains continuity, it allows you to carry a trace of the timeline you came from. Scientists still argue whether this residual memory could propagate across branches or loops in a measurable way. But you don't need proof. You feel it. You notice your heartbeat in the dark. Slow, steady, reminding you that even if time bends, curves, or hides its contradictions, your own consciousness marches forward. That forward motion feels more like a choice now than a threat. Maybe the universe doesn't demand understanding, only participation. You walk with deliberate steps, letting each footfall affirm that you belong somewhere, even if that somewhere is slightly misaligned. A fringe idea enters your thoughts. Some philosophers suggest that living through temporal anomalies could expand perception, granting subtle awareness of events beyond the usual now. Maybe that explains the persistent oddities you notice, the faint sense of premonition, the recognition of patterns no one else sees. You chuckle, second joke, thinking that if you ever join a secret society, this will be your initiation test. The city hums around you. Each sound feels layered with history, the echo of footsteps long gone, conversations remembered or imagined, music from multiple timelines converging in a single moment. It's eerie, beautiful, and slightly overwhelming. Scientists still argue whether such perceptual overlays could exist physically, or if they're entirely a byproduct of human memory and expectation. You decide it doesn't matter, they exist for you, and that's enough. You pause at a corner and watch the interplay of lights on wet pavement. Time itself seems elastic here, stretching a second into something almost meditative. You think about all the mechanisms that prevented your paradox from erasing you. The nudges, the loops, the censorship, the multiverse branches. Together, they've created an invisible safety net. You didn't just survive. You were preserved. Carefully, quietly, like a message folded into an envelope, the universe only you can read. Your thoughts turn inward. You realize that these experiences have changed how you think about identity. If timelines can diverge, loops can fold back, and cosmic censorship hides contradictions, then selfhood isn't fixed. It's a fluid, multi-layered construct. You are not only the sum of your memories and actions here, you are a continuation of every branching possibility, every looped trajectory, every hidden paradox that touches you. And that realization is grounding in its own strange way. Third joke, almost whisper. You imagine introducing yourself at a party. Hi, I'm me, but also a couple of other versions you'll never meet. The image is absurd and hilarious in the quiet dark. You breathe, letting the humor soften the edges of the existential weight. With each step, each breath, the city feels less like a backdrop for potential catastrophe and more like a living, responsive organism. Time doesn't threaten you anymore. It enfolds you, folds around itself, and you simultaneously, offering both mystery and stability. You start to understand that the grandfather paradox isn't a cliff to fall off. It's a set of mirrors to navigate. And mirrors, unlike cliffs, can be walked around, reflected through. H even admired. You walk onward, carrying your memories, your mismatches, and your humor as tethers. Time may twist, loop, and hide its contradictions, but you are no longer afraid of what it might reveal or conceal. You start noticing subtle patterns in human behavior you hadn't seen before. The way pedestrians adjust their steps to avoid one another. The almost imperceptible pauses before someone speaks. Even a dog crossing the street seems to anticipate the flow of traffic, weaving through gaps that shouldn't exist. It occurs to you that these small, mundane alignments might be echoes of larger cosmic rules. Self-consistency, loops, and censorship manifesting in micro-interactions. Reality isn't correcting itself only at grand, universe-threatening scales. It's constantly nudging tiny threads to maintain coherence. There's a mainstream scientific fact here. Chaos theory shows that small differences in initial conditions can lead to dramatically different outcomes over time, the so-called butterfly effect. Minute nudges, even a fraction of a second in timing, can determine whether events escalate or resolve smoothly. Perhaps what you're observing is the universe's natural chaos managed by subtle enforcement mechanisms, the very same ones that prevented your grandfather paradox from erupting. Scientists still argue how determinism and chaos coexist. If small causes can dramatically affect outcomes, does that mean the future is predictable or inherently uncertain? Your experience tonight straddles both. Events were guided to prevent catastrophe, yet the journey to that guidance feels unpredictable, chaotic, and deeply personal. You notice a fringe idea creeping into your thoughts, the observer effect applied to time itself. Perhaps the mere act of being conscious here, perceiving, remembering, and interacting, subtly adjusts events. Nothing dramatic, nothing grandiose, but enough to create an environment where paradoxes smooth themselves out. You can almost hear the universe whisper, "Don't worry, we've got this covered." You chuckle first joke, imagining that your mere presence in the past made reality take a tiny breath and adjust its posture. Oh, you again. Fine, we'll bend a little. The humor is small but grounding. The lingering mismatch of memories and events that marked your early journey feels less threatening now. In fact, it feels like part of the stabilization process. Your dissonant recollections serve as a subtle anchor, reminding the universe that the observer is here, nudging probabilities to align. Scientists still argue whether such feedback loops could exist, or if this is just your mind weaving order from chaos. Regardless, it feels real, and you let it be. As you continue walking, you realize how loops and branching paths, cosmic censorship, and observer influence might all be facets of the same underlying principle. The universe prioritizes continuity, preservation, and internal coherence. It doesn't matter whether time is linear, circular, or layered across parallel realities. What matters is that contradictions are absorbed, hidden, or smoothed over, leaving life deceptively simple on the surface. The second joke drifts into your thoughts. You imagine reality as a strict editor, red pen in hand, crossing out your mistakes before anyone else sees them. Nice try, but no, you may not erase your grandfather. You smile softly, feeling the tension ease with humor. You think about cause and effect differently now. Actions aren't simply dominoes falling. They're vibrations moving through a medium designed to prevent collapse. When you hesitated, when you almost acted, the universe absorbed the energy, gently redirecting it. Nothing broke. Nothing was erased. Everything is adjusted. Even cosmic anomalies obey subtle rhythms. Scientists still argue about the relationship between cause and observation. Is the universe guiding outcomes toward consistency? Or are we projecting patterns where none exist? Your experience seems to insist on some kind of guided consistency. And for once, it doesn't feel absurd to believe in it. You feel like a participant in a quiet, unseen symphony. Fringe ideas swirl in the edges of your mind. Some suggest that time itself has a memory, like a viscous liquid, smoothing out contradictions over centuries. Others claim that time police, if they exist, operate entirely invisibly, correcting only the anomalies too glaring for the cosmos to ignore. You shake your head, laughing softly, third joke, at the idea of cosmic traffic officers handing out citations to paradoxical travelers. Your perspective continues to shift. You no longer think in terms of paradoxes as potential disasters. Instead, they are glimpses of the mechanisms that protect the universe from itself. They are lessons in subtlety, patience, and the quiet maintenance of balance. You can participate without threatening the system. You can exist without being erased. You can even joke quietly about it. By now, the night feels like a living map. each footstep tracing a line that connects loops, branches, and censored contradictions. You are aware of the paths you've traveled, and of the paths that exist elsewhere, invisible but real. Your memories, mismatched though they are, become companions, signaling where you came from and hinting at what might have been. You're not lost, you're merely walking a very wide, very intricate road. A final, subtle observation settles over you. Stability and chaos, freedom and constraint, presence and erasure, they are not opposites. They are threads of the same fabric, woven together with care. Each paradox, loop, and mismatch is a stitch in the pattern, and you, for all your uncertainties, are part of that pattern. Not a mistake, not an anomaly, not a failed traveler, just a participant. You exhale, feeling the rhythm of the universe sync with your own heartbeat. The hum of time, faint but undeniable, carries reassurance. You exist. You persist. And whatever paradoxes you faced have been absorbed, hidden, or transformed into the quiet architecture of reality itself. By now, the city around you feels layered, like a multidimensional diorama. Streetlights glow faintly against shadows that seem slightly too long. Sounds echo with subtle dissonance, and even the breeze carries a hint of temporal feedback, brushing your skin with a sensation that's familiar yet inexplicably off. You start noticing tiny coincidences in your interactions with people. Someone glances your way just as you think of them. A bus arrives a moment early. A lost item appears exactly when you need it. It's not magical. It's pattern, probability, and the subtle hand of temporal structure guiding the flow. Mainstream physics provides a framework for what you're feeling. Entanglement. Quantum particles that share information instantaneously across distances demonstrate that correlation can exist without obvious causation. While the effect is usually tiny and confined to subatomic scales, the concept stretches your imagination. Could the universe be entangled with itself across time, subtly nudging outcomes to maintain coherence? The analogy isn't perfect, but it's evocative enough to ground your intuition. Scientists still argue whether large-scale entanglement, sometimes called macroscopic quantum coherence, is possible, or whether decoherence always prevents it. Your subjective experience suggests something similar might happen on the scale of daily life, although the mechanism is beyond current empirical verification. You notice it in small adjustments, the quiet, almost invisible corrections that preserve continuity. A fringe idea edges into your thoughts. Some claim that déjà vu is an artifact of temporary entanglement with alternate timelines or previous loops. You feel a familiar tickle of recognition, like remembering something you technically never experienced in this branch. The first joke slips quietly. So that explains why I'm suddenly psychic. or just late for dinner in another universe. You stop at a corner and watch a car slow just enough for a pedestrian to cross. Timing seems impeccable, too precise to be accidental. You realize that even the smallest interactions obey hidden rhythms, temporal synchronizations that prevent contradictions or collisions. Scientists still argue whether such synchronizations exist objectively or are purely perceptual artifacts, but they feel deeply convincing tonight. You think back to all the mechanisms that preserved your continuity: loops, self-consistency, branching universes, cosmic censorship, subtle nudges in probability. They've formed an invisible lattice, holding everything steady even as you wandered in between moments. It's like watching a tightrope walker from below and realizing the wire itself is alive, adjusting to every imperceptible shift. A second joke emerges. You imagine reality as a concierge, politely saying, "Yes, you may enter, but please don't rearrange the furniture of history." The image makes you chuckle, despite the existential gravity hanging around it. Your memories drift naturally now. They're no longer misaligned flashes of past impossibilities. They're soft markers, reference points for navigating the invisible lattice. Each recollection feels like a tiny anchor, tethering your consciousness while still allowing movement. Scientists still argue whether memory can function as a temporal stabilizer, but in your experience, it's undeniable. You realize that every attempt to disrupt events in the past, every near paradox, has left subtle echoes, gentle corrections, and reinforcements that guide your path. These invisible forces haven't robbed you of agency. They've shaped it, nudged it, and preserved the larger structure. You begin to understand that the universe doesn't prevent action, it channels it. A fringe whisper drifts in. Maybe some people are chronically more attuned to these echoes. Perhaps those who feel déjà vu, notice improbable coincidences, or sense repeating patterns are picking up signals of temporal adjustments. You wonder if you've always been sensitive and whether tonight simply amplified that capacity. Third joke. Great. So I've got a cosmic Wi-Fi signal in my head. Do I get a password? Walking along, you reflect on your journey from fear of erasure to awareness of structural support. You've moved from anxiety over the grandfather paradox to the subtle joy of recognizing the universe's quiet safeguards. Life doesn't always feel coherent. Sometimes it's messy, mismatched, unpredictable. But now, you sense that there's a framework maintaining balance underneath, soft enough to feel natural, strong enough to prevent collapse. Scientists still debate whether hidden mechanisms like these are necessary for universe-scale stability, or if they're emergent byproducts of existing laws. The argument mirrors your own journey. Experience suggests design, but understanding is elusive. You accept that. Observation, participation, and humor are enough to navigate the edges without collapsing. By the time you reach a quiet park, the night sky stretches endlessly above. The stars twinkle without concern, oblivious to paradoxes, loops, or branching timelines. You lie back and feel the subtle alignment of everything, the microrhythms of matter, the macro patterns of causality, and your own consciousness threading through it all. You are part of the system, neither its creator nor its victim, but a participant with a soft, resonant pulse. You exhale, letting your awareness settle. Humor, curiosity, observation, and memory form your anchor. The universe is vast, complex, and patient. You can navigate it without fear. You can exist without threatening it. And more surprisingly, you can enjoy the experience. Park is quiet, almost unnervingly so, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. The air carries the faint scent of damp earth and distant blossoms, mingling with the soft hum of night insects. You lie back on the grass, feeling the subtle tilt of the ground, the gentle pull of gravity that doesn't care about paradoxes or branches or loops. It's simple. It's unremarkable. And yet, it's everything you've been circling tonight, everything that preserves you while allowing the world to keep moving. You reflect on your journey, the initial shock of standing outside time, the panic over potential erasure, the thrill of imagined agency, and the subtle hints of self-consistency. You remember the nudges that kept your grandfather alive, the invisible branches that accommodated your existence, and the quiet censorship of contradictions you never fully witnessed. Each mechanism was a quiet reassurance that the universe is both patient and clever, that the laws of physics are more about preservation than punishment. A mainstream scientific fact anchors this reflection. General relativity and quantum mechanics permit these structures, closed time-like curves, branching histories, and entanglement, though they remain largely theoretical in practice. Scientists still argue about the implications for free will, identity, and causality. Could consciousness influence events in subtle ways? Or are you simply along for the ride, observing patterns already baked into the structure of reality? Tonight, it doesn't feel urgent to resolve these debates. Observation itself becomes a kind of participation, a gentle integration into the invisible scaffolding that maintains temporal coherence. A fringe idea surfaces once more. Some theorists speculate that our perception of linear time is an emergent property, like a software interface hiding the complex calculations beneath. You smile quietly, first joke, thinking that your life might just be the beta version of a cosmic operating system. The misaligned memories you've carried all night become something softer, almost companionable. They are echoes of other branches, fragments of loops, traces of paradoxes, gently absorbed by cosmic censorship. They remind you that while you are anchored here, your consciousness is threaded across possibilities. Second joke slips in. So technically, I'm late everywhere, but also everywhere on time. Multitasking, universe style. You feel the universe's subtle rhythm in your body, the vibration of quantum fluctuations, the pulse of entangled events, the soft tug of self-consistency, nudging outcomes toward coherence. Every step, every breath, every thought resonates with a framework that is invisible yet undeniable. You begin to see loops, branches, and hidden corrections as more than theoretical curiosities. They are active participants in the story of your existence. A fringe whisper teases your imagination. Perhaps some people are chronically aware of these adjustments, the faint echoes of the block universe, the tiny entanglements of macroscopic events. You think of philosophers, mystics, and those who have reported déjà vu as unusually sensitive to the rhythms you've been tracing tonight. The third joke surfaces quietly. Great, so I'm basically tuned into cosmic Wi-Fi. Password, don't erase me. Your heartbeat slows as you lie in the grass. Each pulse aligns with the rhythm of the invisible scaffolding, reminding you that you exist without threatening the system. The fear that once gripped you, the dread of breaking causality or erasing your existence, melts into understanding. The universe doesn't need you to avoid disaster. It accommodates you while maintaining coherence. The night stretches endlessly above, a canvas of stars unaffected by the small perturbations of human action. Loops, branches, and paradoxes are all folded into its vast architecture, hidden, guided, and softened. You feel small, yes, but also integrated, part of a system vast enough to include all possibilities without collapsing under their weight. You exhale fully, letting humor, curiosity, and quiet all settle in tandem. Observation, memory, and laughter have become anchors. You are neither master nor victim, but participant, a consciousness threading gently through a universe that is patient, clever, and resilient. And as the gentle night hum envelops you, the paradox that began this journey dissolves into reflection. You understand that survival wasn't about defiance or control. It was about being present, noticing the subtle mechanics that maintain reality, and walking with them rather than against them. You drift into that realization like a slow tide, feeling continuity, safety, and calm. The night stretches around you like soft velvet, quiet and patient, carrying the distant hum of the city and the faint rhythm of the universe itself. You lie there in the grass, feeling each breath as if it threads through space-time, a gentle reminder that you exist exactly where you should. Everything that threatens to overwhelm you, paradoxes, branching universes, loops, mismatched memories, has been absorbed, redirected, or quietly folded into the architecture of reality. You notice how even fear has softened into something almost luminous, a subtle guide that taught you patience and observation. The stars above are steady, indifferent yet comforting, twinkling with the same patterns they always have. You realize the universe doesn't need your approval, and paradoxes don't need resolution. They simply exist, and in their existence, they create a landscape that allows you to move, to breathe, and to notice. Loops and branches, cosmic censorship, self-consistency, all these mechanisms aren't punishments, but scaffolding. You feel their gentle support, as if the very air around you hums quietly in agreement. You are safe. You are integrated. You are part of a vast system that doesn't falter. Your memories drift softly through your mind, echoes of timelines and loops, reminders that your consciousness is layered across possibilities. Yet, rather than confusion, they bring calm, proof that you've survived not by control, but by being present and perceptive. Humor flits in here and there, subtle and warm, a bridge between existential wonder and everyday absurdity. You feel connected to yourself, to the universe, to the rhythm of events that preserves life without fanfare. As the night deepens, the sense of anxiety dissolves into the quiet joy of simply being. Time is no longer something to fear or conquer. It is a landscape, a lattice, a soft, continuous pulse that carries you gently forward. You feel weightless, anchored, and alive. The universe waits, patient and kind, and you finally feel ready to drift alongside it. Sweet dreams.